Today we're diving into estuaries. This is the place where the ocean literally meets the land in a constant dance of change. Estuaries are semi closed coastal areas where fresh water from the rivers mix with salt water from the seas. They're some of the most dynamic environments on Earth. What makes them fascinating is how variable they are. Salinity, temperature, and even oxygen levels can change dramatically in just a few hours. Despite that chaos, estuaries are incredibly productive. They might have low diversity, but not a ton of species, but they have high biomass, meaning they're an enormous amount of living material. Think of them as nature's nurseries, supporting fish, birds, and invertebrates that thrive in these nutrient rich waters. Let's define what it means to be an estuary. It's not just a place where a river meets the ocean. It's a zone of mixing, turbulence, and constant change. Every tide shifts the chemistry and structures of the environment. The organisms that live here are specialists with dealing with stress. One moment they're surrounded by brackish water, the next they're nearly fresh or fully marine water. Because of this, you won't find many species as in coral reefs or as in the open ocean, but the ones that do live here are abundant and tough. This combination of harshness and productivity is what makes estuaries ecologically powerful. The most common type of estuary is the drowned river valley, also called a coastal plain estuary. These form when the rising sea level flood river valleys, a process that happens after the last ice age. Imagine ancient rivers like the Susquehanna being swallowed by the ocean as the glacier melted. That's how the Chesapeake Bay was born. The result is a broad, shallow basin with gentle gradients from freshwater uprivers to salty ocean waters in the mountains. These estuaries are vital for fisheries, nutrient cycling, and human settlements, which often grow along the calm, navigable waters. Another type is the bar-built estuary. These are created when waves and currents pile up sediment into sandbars or barrier islands along the coast, trapping water inside. Think of them like natural lagoons protected from the full force of the ocean. Along the Atlantic coast in the United States, especially near Cape Hatteras, you can see the entire chains of these barrier islands. These dynamic systems, storms can break them open or seal them off again. Inside, the water stays shallow and warm, protected for seagrasses and juvenile fish. They might look peaceful, but they're constantly changing with winds, tides, and sediment flow. Tectonic estuaries are shaped by the movement of Earth's crusts. They form when the land sinks or shifts due to faulting or earthquakes, allowing seawater to rush in. The best known example is right here in California, the San Francisco Bay. Millions of years of tectonic activities along with the San Andreas Fault creating a low-lying basin that eventually flooded with the ocean waters. These estuaries often have complex shorelines and deep channels, supporting an incredible mix of habitats. Mudflats, eelgrass beds, and salt marshes, all in one place. Because of their geological origins, tectonic estuaries often serve as natural laboratories where you can study how Earth's movement shapes coastal ecosystems. Fjords are some of the most breathtaking estuaries on the planet. They're formed when glaciers carve deep valleys into the coastline and then retreat, allowing seawaters to flood in. You'll find these in Alaska, Norway, New Zealand, and Chile. Long, narrow, steep-sided inlets with deep waters and calm surfaces. The bottom layers often become stagnant and low in oxygen because the deep water doesn't mix easily with the surface water. Despite that, fjords are nutrient-rich environments that support rich plankton, blooms, and unique cold water communities. They're a reminder that even the harshest, coldest places on Earth can support abundant life. Where estuaries form depends on a lot of the shape of the coastline. They're best developed along passive continental margins. That's where the broad, flat coastal plains and wide continental shelves meet. These regions let sediment settle and rivers flow gently into the ocean, perfect for conditions for estuaries to expand. On the flip side, active margins, much like the Pacific coast, have steep cliffs and narrow shelves, so there's little space for estuaries to develop. This is why the East Coast and Gulf Coast are full of sprawling estuaries, while the West Coast has only a few, such as the San Francisco Bay. Salinity in estuaries is never constant, one of the defining features of these environments. Depending on the tides, rainfall, and river discharge, salinity can swing from nearly fresh to almost full strength seawater in a single day. It usually ranges from about 5 to 30 psu. Because salt water is denser, it tends to sink beneath fresh water, forming what we call a salt wedge. The mixing of these layers creates a constant shifting gradient that influences where organisms live. Fish and invertebrates often move up or down the estuary as salinity changes, finding the comfort zones in the watery tug of war between the river and the sea. To survive in the ever-changing mix, estuary organisms must be incredibly adaptable. Many are eurohaline, meaning their tolerance to wide ranges of salinities. Some species, like crab and certain fish, are osmoregulators. They actively control their internal salt and water balance, maintaining stability even when the environment shifts. Others, like some worms or mollusks, are osmoconformers. Their internal chemistry simply matches the salinity around them. Each strategy has trade-offs. Osmoregulators are more energy, but they can live in more places. Osmoconformers save energy, but must stay within their comfort zone. This balance of physiology and environment defines who thrives in these estuaries. Estuarine plants face the same salty challenges, and they've evolved remarkable adaptations. Cardgrass or spartina uses salt glands to excrete excess salt. If you lick the leaf, you can actually taste the salt crystals. Mangroves, on the other hand, filter salt in the root levels or store it in older leaves they eventually drop. Then there's the pickleweed, or Salicornia, which takes the opposite approach. It keeps salt inside the tissues, giving that fleshy, succulent look. These plants not only survive, but thrive, stabilizing sediment, reducing erosion, and provide food and shelter for community estuaries. The floor of an estuary tells its own story. Because estuaries are protected from strong waves and currents, sediments settle easily, creating soft bottoms made up of mud or fine sand. But the living in the salt mud is not easy. It's unstable, constantly shifting, and often low in oxygen or anoxic. Animals that live here need to burrow, dig, or anchor themselves to avoid being swept away or suffocated. Many rely on specialized feeding structures like siphons or tentacles to reach oxygenated water above the surface. Water temperatures in estuaries can swing widely, especially in shallow areas. During low tide on a hot summer day, temperatures can rise quickly, stressing organisms near the surface. Then, as the tides come in, cooler ocean waters flood in and reset the system. These daily and seasonal shifts influence oxygen availability, metabolic rate, and even migration patterns. Many species can only tolerate narrow temperature changes and will move within the tides to stay within its safe limits. On top of that, human activities, from power plant discharges to climate change, can intensify temperature swings, putting even more pressure on these delicate ecosystems. If we zoom out from the mud, the open water of the estuary forms another critical habitat. This is where plankton, both phytoplankton and zooplankton, drift within the tides, forming the foundation of the food web. Many fish species, including commercially important ones, spend at least part of their lives here as larvae or juveniles. Estuaries are true nurseries of the sea, offering shelter and abundant food for young fish before they head out into the open ocean. The mixing of fresh water and salt water also brings nutrients that fuel plankton blooms, turning these calm waters into zones of explosive productivity. Estuary waters is rarely clear. In fact, it's often cloudy or brown from suspended sediments and organic matter carried by the river. The low transparency limits light penetration, which means photosynthesis in these water column is restricted. As a result, most of the primary production in estuaries doesn't come from the phytoplankton or seaweed, but from the flowering plants rooted in the marsh. Grasses that reeds that capture sunlight above the murky waters. These plants produce massive amounts of detritus when they die, which becomes food for decomposers and detrivores. So even in murky waters, life thrives throughout these cycles. Salt marshes are the great heart of many temperate estuaries. Dominated by spartina, they line the water's edge and form dense grassy plains that flood with rich high tides. These marshes are powerhouses of primary production. They convert sunlight into biomass at incredible rates. They also act as nurseries, providing shelter for young fish, crabs, and shrimp. When marsh grass dies, they break down into detritus, fueling the entire estuary food web. Beyond their ecological value, salt marshes protect coastlines from erosion and storm surges. They're natural barriers that help absorb wave energy and filter runoff before it reaches the ocean. Mudflats may look barren at first glance, but beneath that gray surface lies an incredibly active world. These flats are exposed during low tide and submerged when the tide rises, so their inhabitants must handle both air and water. Burrowers like clams, worms, amphipods, and crabs move through the sediment, feeding on constantly turning it over, a process called bioturbation that keeps oxygen circulating. On the surface, snails, mud shrimp, and fiddler crabs scavenge for detritus left behind by the tides. When the salt retreats, shorebirds swoop in, probing the mud for invertebrates, while small fish and even raccoons feed in the shallows. Every tide rewrites the scene, making mudflats some of the most dynamic ecosystems on Earth. In the tropical and subtropical estuaries, salt marshes give way to mangrove forests. These trees are masters of survival in salty, oxygen-poor environments. Their root systems not only stabilize the coastline but also serve as living nurseries for countless marine species. Some of these mangroves have pneumatophores, which are snorkeling-like roots that stick up from the sediment to absorb oxygen. Other filters out salt or excreted through the special glands. Beneath their tangled roots, you'll find fish, crabs, and shrimp hiding from predators. While above, birds and insects thrive on the canopy. Mangroves also protect shorelines from storm damages, acting as natural barriers that reduce erosion and absorb waves' energies. Estuaries support some of the most complex and interconnected food webs in the ocean. Primary producers like phytoplankton, seaweed, and marsh grasses capture sunlight and form the foundation of life. They're eaten by primary consumers such as zooplankton, worms, and clams, which in turn feed small fishes, crabs, and shorebirds. Larger fish, like marine mammals, and yes, even humans, occupy the top predator roles. But one of the most fascinating aspects of estuary food webs is its importance of detritus. When marsh grasses and mangroves leaves decay, the resulting organic matter fuels an entire detritus-based ecosystem, proof that in nature, even death feeds life. Seagrass beds are like underwater meadows that sometimes form in clear parts of the estuaries. These grasses aren't seaweed, they're true flowering plants that roots into the sediment. They provide food, oxygen, and shelter for fish, crabs, and manatees, while also anchoring sediments and improving water qualities. Their presence is a sign of healthy estuaries since they require clear water and stable conditions to grow. Unfortunately, seagrass beds are easily damaged by pollution, dredging, and boat propellers. Protecting them isn't just about saving the plants, it's about preserving the entire community that depends on their shelter and productivity. Finally, let's look at one of the most overlooked heroes of the estuary ecosystems, oyster reefs. These structures form when generations of oysters cement themselves together, creating dense reef-like habitats that serve as the only hard substrate in many estuaries. Oysters are incredible filter feeders. Each one can clean gallons of water per day, removing suspended particles and improving clarity. Their reefs provide shelter for small fish, crab, and other invertebrates while protecting the shoreline from erosion. Sadly, oyster populations have declined worldwide due to overharvesting and pollution, but restoration efforts show that even small reefs can quickly revive local biodiversity and water quality. As we wrap up, remember that estuaries are more than just mixing zones. They're transition points where the entire world collide. They connect rivers, oceans, and the land, creating some of the most productive and vital ecosystems on the planet. From the mudflats to the mangroves, which every inch teems with life that has mastered the art of adaptation. These systems filter pollutants, protect shorelines, and serve as the nurseries for countless marine species, including many that sustain human fisheries. But estuaries are also fragile. Pollution, urban runoff, and climate change threaten their balance. As future scientists and the stewards of the ocean, understanding how these environments function and how they respond to change is key to protecting them. Estuaries remind us that life thrives in the in between, in those shifting spaces where the opposites meet. That's the beauty of marine biology, finding order and wonder in nature's constant motion.